Thank you everyone for your time today. I'm Jeremy Thake. I'm going to run the Microsoft Graph Community Call this month. There are a bunch of other calls that we'll show the list of at the end of this session. We've got an action-packed one this week from various different workload PMs across the Microsoft Graph, and a nice addition with some showcasing of what we're going to be doing with the Changelog by Molly Chauve in our team, which is really exciting. So we're going to get straight into it. Nicolas is going to go first. Nicolas has been on before to talk about search APIs. This is something that we have announced a while ago now, and have a lot of workloads already in it, and he's going to be sharing that update. And as I mentioned, Molly's going to be talking about the changelog, and then we have Phoebe, who's going to be sharing some updates on the Excel API on Microsoft Graph as well. If you do have a question, please feel free to put your hand up. We'll be monitoring in the background in there, or you can post messages in the chat window as well, either Brian or I, or kind of pause the speaker at the appropriate time and get you to ask the question with your mic open if you put your hands up, or in the text messages. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Nicolas, who will talk a little bit about the search API.
Great, thank you everyone. So for me, it's Monday because I'm back from a long weekend. So that was a good start. Okay, so my name is Nicolas Moreau. I have the opportunity to talk in this forum, I think about 6 or 9 months back. So I'm part of a team who is building the search platform for Microsoft 365. So primarily our team is running Outlook Search, is running SharePoint Search, Team Search, and many other workloads. So what I'm going to talk about here is what we are planning to add in the Microsoft Search API for in the next 6 months. Okay, so just a first recap of what we've announced at Ignite last year. So for those who are not familiar with, so Microsoft Search is the experiences where in Microsoft 365 you can search across all your content. You can see this as kind of the successor of SharePoint Search. So Microsoft Search has a wider scope. You can search in SharePoint, but you can also search in Teams. We've also announced connectors, which is the ability to ingest external content into Microsoft 365 and surface this content into SharePoint experience via custom verticals. So this is on the end user visible part. And so our team is building the API that is being used by SharePoint, which is kind of an internal API that is not exposed publicly. And part of that, what we wanted to do is to expose the ability in the Microsoft Graph for third-party developers to build similar experience. So one key scenario is if you have your company has a custom app on mobile that is providing access to a bunch of content to your employee. Maybe you want to integrate search into this mobile app. And if you don't want to use the SharePoint mobile app because your company is building something very specific, then you needed a search endpoint. And so the Microsoft Search API in the graph will provide you this ability. What we've released at Ignite, just a quick recap. On the right-hand side, you can see the type of workload that were exposed. So email and calendar were the first two things we exposed. For email and calendar, I think there's a little bit of redundancy with some already available dollar search capabilities on email and calendar. So I won't dwell too much into that. But at Ignite, we released the ability to search in SharePoint, OneDrive, as well as connectors, which was really one of the key new things. So this is from the what is the data available today that you can reason and search on. From search capabilities, so more from a search feature perspective, what you can do today, you can scope your search by entity. So today we only support scoping by a single entity. So you can either search files, you can either search external items, message. We don't have the ability to do search across multiple type of content, and I will talk a little bit about that later. The results, the search results that come back in the workload are actually graph entities. They look very similar to drive items. Actually, in this slide here, you can see the drive item on the right-hand side is actually the model that if you have today a canvas that is manipulating drive items. So you see you have most of the properties that a drive item has. One caveat here is search doesn't have access to the full set of data. So we have a bunch of property in the search index, But if, for example, you want to access a preview URL, today the search index doesn't have that. So if you wanted to have access to a preview URL, then you would have to do an extra lookup based on the ID of the items to get the item to retrieve the thumbnail URL. So yeah, it's important to note that the graph, the search index doesn't have access to all the properties. And then the last capability was the ability to run KQL queries. So you would be able to scope queries such as file type colon docx and then whatever search term. So this is what we released, and what I want to talk about a little bit later is what we plan to be adding. Before that, what was the thought process to prioritize what we wanted to add? So the key feedback we've got was mostly from SharePoint developers, and the two main piece of feedback was we don't have all the search capabilities that SharePoint has, and there are some gaps and some important gaps, and that is one of them that we are covering in our next release. And the second part is today we were only surfacing drive items, and a lot of people are asking for what about site, what about list item, what about list, what about drives. So we are going to bring all that content that is available in SharePoint. And the third feedback we've received, and I really appreciate it, there was a lot of engagement on GitHub. So I'm kind of new to GitHub, and I really like because I've seen people, and maybe some people in that call here, finding some issues in GitHub that have helped us catch some regression that we have had in our API. So that's the side effect of being in beta. And this has really helped us catch some regression. So one of the things that we also want to improve is to make sure that we catch these regressions so that our API is consistent and that you can run your app on top of it. So these are the three first pieces of feedback that are very SharePoint centric. And there was another piece of feedback, which is we need more content in search. So today, when you go into, especially when you go into Microsoft Search in Bing, you can see a lot of many other things. You can see Teams conversation, you can see bookmarks, answers. So this is something that is currently in planning. We are still figuring out how to prioritize and sequence that work. So this is not coming yet, unfortunately. So Teams bookmark answer is not yet coming. So what is coming? By the end of this year, and we expect to release some of this stuff by Ignite 2020. So the first thing is, currently we're in beta. Our goal is to graduate and to release the API on 1.0. We've gotten feedback. I got a lot of questions from companies that, the API is in beta. Can we run our business on beta? Yeah, you could, but you take the risk that we do some breaking change, and sometimes we're making some subtle breaking change. So that's one risk. One good factor on the releasing this is that we have some internal workloads at Microsoft, some product within Microsoft that are going to use the Search API, which is for us really a good thing to kind of have a good engagement with a team that we are interacting with. So this is also one good reason for us to move to the API on 1.0 to a stable version. So the second piece that we are bringing is we are going to bring more entities. So what is coming, and I should have listed it here, what is coming is we are bringing list items, we are bringing lists, we are bringing drives, we are bringing sites. So there are 4 more entities that are very SharePoint-centric, but these entities are coming. So you will be able to say, okay, give me all the sites that satisfies query, whatever, including star, technically. And you could also be saying, give me list items and sites that satisfies a particular query. So in the SharePoint workload, you will be able to specify multiple type of content, and the search results will be an aggregation, a single list of either list items, site, whatever that you've been asking for. So the third bullet point here in terms of search capabilities. So we are adding some more search capabilities. So we are finally supporting select properties for all types. So let's take two examples. You need to manipulate drive items, but you only need 2 properties. So by default, when you request a drive item, we give you a list of, I guess, 7 or 8 properties. So if you want to trim down the list of properties to optimize the content that is flowing over the wire, you now can do that. So you can restrict to specific properties. The second part is for types that are extensible, like list item. Now you will be able in list item to specify, I want a list item and I want custom column A, custom column B. You'll be able to specify the custom column that your list item has. So these are for select properties. Sorting is something that we didn't have. Previously, sorting was by default by relevance, except it was by date for email and message. So now we will support the ability to sort result on any sortable property. So this is something new in the API, and I will show you how it's going to look like in the API. The third search capability is refiners. So this has been a huge feedback that we've received, and that was one of the key missing feature, especially for people who've been working with SharePoint Search for a long time. SharePoint Search has incredible capabilities with refiners. We rename them as aggregation, which is more seems like to be more an industry standard. So we have modeled aggregation in the API, and I will show you a little bit later how this is going to look like in the payload, in the request, how you can express the aggregation in the request, and how the aggregation will come back in the response. And the last feature we're adding, which is kind of a icing on the cake, is a did you mean spell check feature, where we will be in the backend calling a speller to potentially to suggest some spell check correction. So today it will only work in a suggest mode. It will actually suggest something. It will not alter the query. Altering the query is something that we are thinking about. So altering the query means it will actually change the query on your behalf and tell you, by the way, we've altered the query because we know this word didn't make sense, so we change it for that particular one. Okay, so this is what is coming. What I'm proposing to show you in the next two slides is how sort will look like in the graph request. So first, for those of you who are not familiar with the Microsoft Search API in Graph, so we are having a post payload. We are a little bit different from other payloads. The reason is search is a little bit specific. Search, you're not specifically accessing one item, and also we want to express some more complex things. So sort is relatively simple. When you go to aggregation, you will understand why this was not modeled as a pure REST API, as a pure REST call where everything can be passed into the URL. So here on the request side, you can see that you can specify in the sort clause, you can sort on multiple properties. So here I'm sorting by author, ascending. So this is an alphabetical ascending, and sort by date created. So I have here I'm at the ability to specify multiple properties where I want to sort on. The underlying assumption here is that the property is sortable. So either in the connectors world or in the SharePoint world, the property has to be sortable. So this is for sort. The next one is a little bit more hairy, so I try to simplify it. It's refiners. So the key scenario, one very good example, one very good illustration is when you're requesting for file. Okay, I want a file that satisfies foobar, but I also want to, on top of the search result, to get the list of what were the available file types satisfying this query. So here what I'm saying is I am saying that I want the aggregation based on the property file type. I want 5 aggregation. I want 5 different buckets. We'll see what these buckets are. And I want to get the most represented bucket. So that's the bucket sort count. And there should be at least a minimum of 10 items per bucket. So this is how I'm expressing the aggregation request. And then in the response, we will get the search results. So there's no change. So it's important to note that for aggregation, you get the search result, but on top of the search result, you get something else. You get another table. And this other table will list you the list of buckets. So here it's saying that there are actually 289 documents satisfying this foobar query. and that has the file type equals docx. And then 45 documents satisfy the query and have file type equal doc, and so on. And this numbering is actually sorted by from greater to lowest. In the buckets, you get a token. So for those who are familiar with SharePoint, that's the way SharePoint works. So this token is actually an uncoded string, so that if you actually want to filter the results, now I have all these documents and I see that there is 289 docx, 45 docs, and maybe more, and I want to drill down and just look at the docx one. What you would have to do is in the query clause and is pass the refinement token alongside the query string, and this will trim down the results to only the documents that have file type equal docx. So this so aggregation has been something that has been asked a lot. If some people have some feedback, feel free to reach out to me offline or in the chat window on this particular one. We've been noodling and iterating a little bit on that. In SharePoint, you could do really a lot of things. So we are trying to rationalize a little bit, come to what the industry seems to be doing. We've been looking at other API to surface to really see what do really people need, and we've been trimming most of, because I know in SharePoint there's some creative things you could do with Refiner. So we are kind of shaving some of these feature away.
That's awesome, okay. Nicolas. It's really good to see this much improvement coming through as well on this API, because I know in the past, especially with our existing ecosystem, it's been something that's been very heavily used. Quick question I have for you was what kind of scenarios do you see this being used for within existing applications?
So this one, I guess, if you want to build a decent search experience, I mean, the ability to refine on file types. For if you're building a so the scenario I was talking about is if your company has a custom app for employees. I think I can imagine. I know that large companies have built their own My Microsoft, whatever. So if you want to expose search for this in such an experience, you need refiners. That's the basic thing that customers want. When you are looking for file, you want to be able to refine by typically author, file type, and probably size. So this is one example. I know in the SharePoint world, people are using refiner for some crazy things. People are even building e-commerce site based on that capability.
Yeah, and in the past implementations I've had, and we have Vesta on the call as well, who's probably kind of roll out a bunch of them, is in a company where there's lots and lots of site collections, being able to just use search to find the correct site collection. Now the indexes are so up to date, or even span list items across multiple lists is a good way of just kind of getting all that information in one hit, rather than having to query the list API for every list within every site collection that comes through. So that's really neat. And one other thing was a lot of people used it for site collection fetching. Now there is a sites API in the Microsoft Graph as well now, that it is app only because it's not security trimmed. And so there is a scenario that was used for search that it can now be done with the sites API as well. So as you're looking at things, it's really worth reading the top level pages in the learn section of our docs, because it explains the most common scenarios and why you'd use them, to kind of introduce you to these APIs. So it's just a bit of a tip there, because the graph is growing very, very quickly as people like Nicolas are rolling these features out. So no, that's great.
Yeah, and by the way, everything I've showed here is not app only; it's delegation permissions. So everything gets executed on the behalf of the user, and that's what we're prioritizing for. We really want to build search for end users.
And so in terms of what goes V1, will that be everything that's existingly on the beta API will go V1, and these new features you're talking about will be in beta?
I guess what I expect is that refiners and sort might still be in beta. All the rest will be in V1. That's okay. My expectation. Yeah, and the reason is we want to still have a little bit of room to potentially make some adjustments, some API changes in the API shape. So that's what we want to put this in beta. But all the rest will be available in release.
I don't see any other questions in there. So Nicolas, thanks so much for today. That's awesome. Thank you for jumping on. And if there are follow-up questions, as you say, we can collaborate on those in the chat window after the fact as well. So thank you again for jumping on this morning, mate, and hope everything's well with you. Okay, so next up we have Molly Shove, who's actually in our team on the developer experience side and has been working on the changelog, which has been something that we've had a lot of feedback on in the last few years of how do we keep up to date with the graph. So Molly, thank you for joining, and if you want to take over the presentation so you can share your screen and show it in action, I'm really looking forward to seeing all the feedback on this.
Okay. I did not get the memo about the aesthetic for the presentation, so you will all be treated to my favorite animal stock photos available in PowerPoint, and also to see the wonderful changes that we've made to the changelog. This is sort of our before view. This is the status quo, the current changelog that we have, and then this is after our redesign. As you can see, it's cleaned up. We have a few different new features on the page, which I will be more than happy to walk you through. Okay. So the things that we've added are filters, search and sort, and RSS feed. And on the back end, we've done some automation in order to decrease the amount of errors that we see when you are looking through your changes. So we have a variety of different kinds of filters. We have product filters for like what API you're using. Are you using SharePoint? Are you using Mail? So that way you can see changes to only the APIs that you happen to care about. Similarly, version filters. So whether you want 1.0 or beta, you can now just only see that. You can check to see what's available on your sovereign cloud of choice. And you can also look for specific kinds of changes. So if you're only looking for subtractions or additions, we got you covered. We also have an RSS feed in case you need more notifications in your life. I know I do. But also it's helpful because you can see changes that are just by whichever category you would want to filter off of. So if you just want to see what is relevant to your sovereign cloud, or you want to see what is relevant to, a specific API, then you have the ability to do that now. I felt like search and sort were pretty self-explanatory. Like you can search through it, you can sort through it. So I did make a slide for that. But I did make one for automation, which you do not necessarily need to know the backend details of to know that it sort of will end up solving a variety of problems. Specifically, if somebody is taking somebody moves from beta to 1.0, they oftentimes will just copy paste that bit of they will copy paste the change that they made for beta, and then they will paste that into the 1.0 documentation, but it will link to the wrong documentation and will oftentimes be just not correct. And so in order to decrease that, and also to make sure that we are showing all changes that occur, we've now automated the way that it works. So that way you will make sure that all of the changes are complete. All of them will link to the correct and relevant documentation, and it should be a lot more smooth. Does anyone have any questions, and/or would you like to see a demo?
Show them the demo, Molly. You're teasing them all. Come on. I mean,
Okay.
The penguin's cute for sure.
So this is it. This is all sample data. So it is both, there's not that much there. And you'll see that like a lot of these have no things, but you just want users changes. You just want additions. So far, all the sample data that we have is global service in 1.0. But it's quite exciting. We have a lot of different categories and subcategories that you can look under. So that way you can get precisely what you want. Over here, we have the RSS feed. Here's our sorting. And then you can hide or show the filters. And let's search for something. Let's search for photo. There you are. Any questions?
A lot of people saying this is great in the chat in terms of time saver and how people keep up to date, which is great. I will say we do get a lot of feedback on this, and it was great to get the features and the ways that people would want to see this data. So that's great. And so thanks very much for driving this, Molly. This is excellent. There are future things that we will be doing around the developer program with this too. So this is a bit longer down the line, but now we have this in a structured way. Before, just so you know, it was marked down. Our PMs, when they would push their doc changes through, like Nicolas and Phoebe, would have to go and manually write these changelog entries. And so we had some formatting, but it wasn't enough. And so now this has been moved back very, very close to the service when it's deployed and also generated, and the authors have the ability to make those things changed. But what we want to do with the developer program is, if we can see what APIs you're using, we'll actually personalize this changelog for you as well. So this is just the first crack at this. But as you can see in Molly's address bar, you can bookmark these things and keep coming back based on the queries that are happening, or go grab the RSS feed for that particular search result and be notified when new things pop up. So when will this be released is the big question that's coming over on the chat, Molly.
If it is not released by the end of the month, I will be personally very sad. It's really close. It is just ludicrously close.
Yeah, this has been a very big project with lots and lots of people involved. So, but it will be great to come out. You will notice that the link will change. That URL is actually an internal test link, but it will be on the developer.microsoft.com site now and not in the docs, but we will handle a bunch of redirects so that if you go to the existing changelog, you'll immediately be punted straight over into here too. And as you can see, it will work in both dark and light mode too. Now, one thing to note, in the bottom right there, you'll see "We'd love your feedback," which is actually our way of collecting NSAT or developer satisfaction from you, our developer community. And so I'd encourage you, when this new system is live, to let us know what you think by filling in those forms when they pop up. We do actively sit down and look through all those ratings and even the ad hoc feedback. And if you leave your email address there, with GDPR reasons, we have like 30 days basically to reach back out to you and get follow-up questions if we have them based on the feedback you've given. So we are actively listening, and I think this is great evidence of what Molly's been driving here as the PM on this, to get this done. So
awesome.
Cool.
I think I need to give you back control now.
Yeah, thank you, Molly. That's awesome.
No worries.
All right, so I'm going to share my screen again. And then for the third topic today, we have Phoebe, who's PM for one of the PMs from the Excel API side inside of Microsoft Graph, and wanted to share some updates on what's going on the Excel APIs on Microsoft Graph. So Phoebe, do you want to take over and present your part of the session? Yep. Thanks for joining as well, because I know time zone wise, this is a bit rough on you, based on where you're located.
So, hello everyone. I'm Phoebe Yuan from the Excel Graph team. And the Excel Graph team locates in Beijing, and now it's almost midnight. But good morning, everyone. And our team measure working on Excel REST APIs. And I'm very happy to have the opportunity to share some updates from Excel Graph in today's call. So as you all know, Microsoft Graph provides a unified programmability model that you can use to access the tremendous amount of data in Microsoft. And our Excel Graph is one of them. And you can use Excel REST APIs to extend the value of your data to do analysis, performing calculations, generating reports, storing or tracking data. Actually, we have a lot of customers who are using Excel Graph as the solution in their daily work. So you can see from this slide below that the following companies or teams are our existing customers. So for more details about all available Excel Graph APIs, please go to our Graph documentation site to see how to easily play with them. So for what's new, we have two items to share today. The first is long-running operation pattern and async create session API, which uses this pattern. We decided to invest in this area because we noticed there were telemetry data showing some failures caused by request timeout. And we also heard from our customers reporting failures for the same reason. So we decided to introduce the long-running operation model to address this issue, hoping that we could provide a more reliable Excel Graph service to our customers. We also complete one API in this model for session creation scenario. which I will introduce with more details in the later slides. And the second update will be we will provide more detailed information in Excel errors. We received the feedback that errors are confusing sometimes in Excel, and Excel graph didn't provide enough guidance on how to handle errors. So the customer feedback we always paid a lot of attention to. So to address the usability pain points, we will make improvements and provide more detailed error information in coming future. We will also have documentation in place soon to introduce the error handling part. So for the first update item, long-running operation. As Excel REST requests need to be completed within certain amount of time, otherwise the request will time out and users would see the request failure. However, we noticed some APIs actually require indeterminate time to complete. So to solve this issue, we introduced a long-running operation pattern. And by adopting this pattern, our users do not need to wait until the action is completed before returning a response or worrying about the timeout for the request. And currently, we have only one API using this pattern, the long-running operation pattern. That is the async create session API, which is already in beta version this month. This is good news, right? And in future, we hope we could provide more and more APIs with the long-running operation pattern. Okay, so next slide, I will give some detailed introduction to the async create session API. The first step is to initiate the create session request. So in the request, add a header of the preferred response async to indicate this is a long-running operation request. And just as shown in the below, there might be two possible responses. The left side is the common response with 201 created status code. So this will happen when the workbook could be open in a short time. It won't enter a long-running operation pattern. Instead, it will return result directly very shortly. The right side actually is the example of response for long-running case. Response will return the 202 accepted status code. So if you see the 202, it is for sure you are entering the long-running operation pattern with async needed information provided afterwards. And the next slide is the second step to pull create session status through getting the operation ID method. There are three possible status listed here. You can see the green highlighted in this slide that are the running, succeeded, and the failed status. So for running, it means the creation is still ongoing. And the succeeded means the session creation is successful. And the failed, of course, means the creation doesn't succeed. So in the succeeded case, you can see the resource location will contain the detailed URL of the created session information. And one thing needed to be noticed in the response here is in the failed case, because the async request is successful, it will return the 200 OK in the HTTP status code. However, the creation operation is failed, so the status will show failed in the response. It is a little bit different comparing to the past responses in the Excel graph APIs. And then the last step for the async create session API is to acquire the session info. You can use the get request to get the corresponding session information to get the information. And in response, you could get the created session ID through the ID value here. And now, so the previous three slides show the end-to-end the async creation process is completed. Okay. Next update, I want to introduce the improvement we made to provide more detailed information for Excel errors. And you could see the comparison between before and after for error object in Excel graph. And in the past, error object has properties of error code, error message, and inner error. And in the coming future, we will make some improvements and provide a 3-layer structure in our error object. And you can see the example here that there will be top level, second level, and the third level errors in the error object. And for the detailed documentation about errors, we will be published soon. And please stay tuned and check on the updates in the docs site. And to save time in today's call and to be simple in this slide, here's the brief guidance on how to handle Excel graph errors. The most straightforward step is the client should expect to act according to the instructions provided in second level error code and messages first. Ideally, we will provide enough information in this level. But if there's no effective instructions available in the second level in our published docs, so please check on the top level code and the messages. If unfortunately there's still no effective instruction available for the top level, then you can check on the HTTP status code to know the information about error. And please notice the third level code and messages developer use only, for example, for debugging purpose. That's the 2 updates I have for today from Excel graph side. We also want to hear more feedback from our customers from you. So if you encounter any issue while using the Excel REST APIs, please raise questions in Stack Overflow, and we've provided a link in this slide. And please remember to use the Microsoft Graph Excel as the tag so we could respond in time. And if you want to have any specific feature that is not available in Excel Graph, please also send a request through the user voice channel. We also provide the link in the slide. And thank you, Jeremy, to providing the link in the chat channel. And at last, please also check on our documentation in future for more updates about Excel Graph. Okay, that's my part for the update today.
That's awesome.
If there's any question, yeah.
Thank you, Phoebe. And again, appreciate you being on so late for this. But we get a lot of demand for this topic, so it's great to have lots of questions in different forums. I mean, they're very active on Stack Overflow for sure, so let's put that link in there. Martinez had a question where he said that when I have an Excel session, a non-persistent one, and calculated it with certain values, I need to download the end result as a PDF file. Are there any plans for this? The only way I can do this now is to create a persistent session, then use the files API to convert to VDF. However, this is impossible for many user scenarios, all using the same Excel file since I want the original file to remain unchanged.
Yeah, actually, we have a non-persistent model for Excel APIs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this can save the effort for this customer.
Yeah, maybe this one is something we could take offline potentially into a Stack Overflow question, and then you can help there with the customer.
Yeah, feel free to open the Stack Overflow question to us, and our feature crew can provide a more detailed solution there.
Yeah, that one seems quite complicated. What is the difference between a non-persistent and a persistent Excel session for those that don't know, Phoebe?
So for persistent session, all the changes made through the Excel APIs will be saved to the document. The non-persistent APIs, you can do some of the calculation, but the changes won't be saved to the file. That's the difference between these 2 modes.
Right. Yeah, so in the case where he's trying to create the PDF, if it's not persisted back, the PDF won't reflect those changes that have been made.
For the PDF file, I'm not quite sure because most of the APIs we are working on is communicating with the Excel files, with the .excel as the file format. But I can double check offline if there's any potential solutions there.
Yeah.
For the PDF.
Let's do that one in Stack for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And thank you for the question.
I really appreciate your time, and it's great to see more coming through on the long operations. I know there's many APIs on the graph that could probably do with that. That I know we've had lots of feedback from various people on. And so our API review board at the moment is trying to make sure consistently we're using the same schema for that long operations. And so you're going to see that pop up in various places as well. So this is just another example of where we're doing that because of the notion of what those APIs are doing under the covers and the fact that it can't just instantly, in a lot of cases, respond with across a request. So thank you again, Phoebe. So just in terms of other news, we have had a TAP program, a technology adoption program for Microsoft Graph for quite a few years now, but we haven't been able to scale it because we didn't have the resources to manage something of the scale we'd like to have done. And in recent weeks, we are growing out our customer partner experience team, which I'm going to actually be leading. I'm going to be handing off the developer experience work. So the Graph Explorer, Changelog, Docs, SDKs will actually be handed to a new lead within Unit Arena's team. And I'm going to be driving up that directly. And Brian, who's been on so many things already around Graph and kind of headed up the 30 Days of Graph blog post in 2018 and has never really been able to escape the claws of the Graph, is our first member of that CPX team, which is great. Now, the reason I wanted to bring this up today is we are growing that Fellowship of the Graph, our technology adoption program. It's been primarily MVPs and regional directors and select existing partners in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem that have worked with us over the years with SharePoint and Exchange. And so now we're opening that up to more partners and SIs that are already under NDA. And so if you are interested in joining our TAP program, we will be doing those calls monthly on the first Wednesday of the month at 8 a.m. So in most cases, it will be the day after the community call. But this month being the first one we did, coincidentally, it wasn't. It was last week because of the way that the month rolled. And so in those monthly calls, we do a similar format to this, but we just do it on an earlier crank. So, Nicolas would have presented some of this stuff maybe 6 months ago to the TAP team, where he would have explaining what they were considering building and the design and so forth. And so this is a great way for partners to see what's coming if they're doing kind of strategic planning of their own products, to know what's going to be out there. These community calls are extremely useful for people to understand what's just being released or what's just around the corner and what's public. And so the TAP programs are definitely a little bit more behind the curtain, a little from that aspect. And it will give the opportunity for people in the TAP to have access to private previews of APIs that aren't in beta API endpoint yet. But, we announce those things and partners are able to kind of sign up for those as well. And then the goal of this really is to make sure that we work closely with our partners out there to make sure they're successful in AppSource. And we are looking for, really good case studies and keynote showcases. So every year at Build and Ignite, we're always looking for new things for Rajesh Shah and Sachin Nadella to present on stage regarding Microsoft Graph. And so, again, if you fill out that form, we will review the client IDs just to look at current usage of your applications. There are some criteria from a bar perspective that we're setting on that. And hopefully we'll see you in there as we do on this community call. So in addition to that, as I mentioned at the beginning of this call, there are a variety of other calls that exist. The SharePoint calls, there's a normal SharePoint developer call, a general developer one, and a SharePoint framework one that Vesa Yuvanen runs that's on the call, as well as a variety of other ones across kind of Microsoft Teams, Office add-ins, Power Apps, and the identity and adaptive cards. So definitely check those things out, and you can add the ICSs for those into your calendars, whatever calendaring system you use. Hopefully you're using Outlook and Exchange. And so that's the easiest way to kind of keep up to date with that. And then there's a podcast that currently Paul and I are doing. We had some really good episodes recently with a variety of different internal PMs. If you haven't checked out the Fluid Framework podcast yet, definitely go check that out. Fluid is going to be an extremely hot property once that is open sourced publicly. And Sam does a really good job of explaining what that is. And as soon as it's available publicly, we'll be sharing some of that stuff on the community call here as well with the graph context too. So with that, all of these videos are being recorded right now, and they're published on the Microsoft 365 Developer YouTube channel. And I highly encourage anyone that's on Twitter, at Microsoft 365 Dev is the Twitter handle that we communicate for everything to do with Microsoft 365 Dev, sharing news, blogs, all the YouTube recordings, any upcoming events, and so forth. So definitely encourage you to do that. And then our next call is always the first Tuesday of the month. And so August 4th, 8 a.m. PST. And again, that URL is the one that will get you the ICS on your calendar so you don't forget. And I'm always kind of posting on Twitter to remind people the day and the morning of to come join the call. And so with that, I'll just see if there's any questions on here, any hands up with regards to anything else, because we do have 10 minutes today, even though we got through 3 speakers. So thank you for the speakers for being on point today. Okay, well, I was jumping around a bit.
So one question, Jeremy, from Gary. Any news on the To-Do API? Not much activity since build.
Yes, so I actually chatted to them yesterday. They are on track. They said August, September in the slide that they announced at Build. I originally thought it was earlier than that, quite frankly, but August, September is a timing. So next month, they're looking to have that in preview in the beta endpoint for To Do. So yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing quite out there yet. We're working with them to get them released into the service in that time frame. It looks like that's definitely going to be hit. They are pretty much ready. There's just a few things they're standing up, but yeah, come up August, I would expect to see them on this community call next month. Gary,
we have a question from Jay. Of all this movement coming, will there be any openings for the giraffe costume wearer? I believe we're talking about Nicolas.
I think Nicola's on here today, and I would scarily ask whether he's actually wearing his giraffe suit right now. But
unfortunately not right now. Sorry.
How's the lockdown hair going, Nicola?
It keeps growing. We'll see how long it can go.
I gave up the ghost on that and just shaved it all.
Yeah, you're a quitter. I can tell.
And then what other questions are there? More elaboration on the recent throttling announcements. Yes. So one thing of note is if you look at the throttling page, which is in the graph docs, which I will just share on my screen. Vincent Beret, who I don't know if he's on the call. It's hard to scan through all those names. But in the docs, if you look at the docs here and you go to use the API on the develop section, you'll see we have this throttling page. And for a long time, we've had feedback that it's very hard to plan, design an application if we don't know how to best handle the APIs. And so you'll now see that if I scroll down to service-specific limits, that we actually are not just got the Outlook API limits in here, which have been there for probably over 2 years now. They've been here since I joined the team. But we specifically started reaching out to the different workload teams and validating what the particular limits are for each of the workloads. Now, ideally we would want the same throttling limits across all of the graph, but in reality, because we are essentially a federated API across 50 plus workloads across Microsoft, the underlying services often have different behaviors because of the notion of how they're being used. And so Vincent has been going through and essentially listing all these for all the different APIs to explain the exact limits, including the Excel APIs that Phoebe presented on today. And so if you haven't had a look at that, I would absolutely go and check out that new list, because it does often help. We do state, that the SDK will handle those 429s for you and back off on those calls. But there are often times where you're just trying to do planning and estimation of like how long it would take to do certain items, and understanding where those limits are in terms of how many requests you can make is really, really important.
And one of the things to mention on the throttling is that this is very much a work in progress, updating all the various workloads on there. And yes, they're aware that we've now exploded out the amount of information on there. They're going to be working on the navigation to help make this easier to browse through, so it's not just infinite scroll going down the page on here.
Yeah, and Jay, in terms of the Microsoft intuiting brackets being corporate management, quite frankly, what we've tried to do is not put product names in here at all. So, even Teams is teamwork because it's more of the productivity angle that we're discussing, and Excel is workbooks and charts. So that was just one oversight where we actually had a product name in here in the graph, and that's really the way we kind of approach this. Is that when I talk about workloads, or Brian or anyone else does, these are the kind of the workloads that we're talking about on the left-hand side of this learn. So when you're exploring things like Excel, starting on the overview page here is going to explain to you like the basic high level of what this workload is meant to be about on the graph. And same with things like Nicolas's search, is this will explain why you would use search within Microsoft Graph. So these topics are useful, and again, they're not meant to be product orientated. So yeah, I'll leave it at that in terms of reading the tea leaves on those things. Excellent. So are there any other questions? If limits are per app per tenant, does that mean that a tenant with 20,000 users has the same limit to a tenant with only 10 users? Yeah, that does. So they're very literal in the way that the throttling limits are. And so, regardless of the tenant, as you mentioned, being 20,000 users or 10 users, those limits will have to be taken into account. The majority of the Outlook Exchange Online ones are basically around the individual mailbox limit. So in that instance, if there was 20,000 users in a tenant or 10, it's done at the user level, so it wouldn't be impacted by the size of the tenant. But there are certainly some on here that have that limit of more at the tenant level throttling than it is based on how many times you're aggressively hitting an individual's mailbox to maybe pull down their calendar information. So there's just something to be in mind of as you're using those APIs. Use the SDKs, watch the 429s, and then you can actually look at this detail to get a little bit more granular on individual workloads and what those kind of behaviors are. So yeah, in the use your API section under throttling is where all that information is obtained. Okay, we're at time. So thank you again to Molly, Phoebe, and to Nicolas for presenting today. The recording will be posted in the Graph blog. If you want to check that out, definitely plug into the RSS feed for that so you get those notifications, as well as all the Changelog notifications when we go live with that. And thanks again. Thanks, Brian, for chiming on with reading the questions out and putting information in there too. So have a good week, everybody, and see you next month.